Minneapolis, Minnesota, 1970. Winter had descended with its familiar, unforgiving grip, transforming the city into a landscape of white and gray, where breath crystallized in the air and darkness fell by mid-afternoon. In the Bryant Junior High School music room, most students had already departed, rushing home to escape the bitter cold that seeped through even the thickest layers of clothing. But one small figure remained, barely visible behind a battered, upright piano in the corner of the room. 12-year-old Prince Rogers Nelson. Undersized even for his age, fingers moving across the keys with a fluidity that belied both his youth and the lack of formal training. The music teacher, Mr. Ronnie Williams, stood in the doorway, coat already buttoned against the Minnesota winter, keys jangling impatiently in his hand. He had stayed an extra 45 minutes, unable to bring himself to interrupt what was unfolding before him. A child seemingly possessed by music itself, lost in a world of his own creation, oblivious to time, to cold, to the practical realities that governed everyone else's schedule. "Prince," he called finally, the name still sounding strange to him. Who names a child Prince? Though he had learned it was not a nickname, but the boy's actual birth name. "Prince, I have to lock up now." The music stopped abruptly, the silence amplifying the wind's howl outside the frost-edged windows. The boy looked up, his expression transforming from one of complete immersion to startled awareness, as if returning from some distant place to find himself unexpectedly in a junior high music room. "Sorry, Mr. Williams," he said, his voice so soft it was nearly inaudible, eyes immediately dropping to avoid direct contact. "I lost track of time." What Mr. Williams couldn't know, what no one could have predicted in that unremarkable moment in an unremarkable school in a city then known more for its frigid temperatures than its musical contributions, was that he was witnessing the earliest formations of an artist who would one day redefine the boundaries of popular music, who would challenge conventional notions of genre, gender, and performance with a boldness that seemed incomprehensibly distant from this painfully shy child who could barely speak, above a whisper when addressed directly. The contrast between the confidence expressed through his fingers on the keys and the almost painful social awkwardness he displayed when forced to interact with other human beings created a dissonance that both fascinated and concerned the adults in his life. Prince gathered his worn notebooks, carefully placing them in a backpack that had seen better days. His movements were economical, precise, nothing wasted, a characteristic that would later define his musical compositions, though at 12 it manifested primarily as a defensive strategy, a way to minimize his presence in a world that seemed overwhelmingly large and loud. "That piece you were playing," Mr. Williams said, making one final attempt at connection with this enigmatic student, "I didn't recognize it." "What was it?" Prince hesitated, his slight frame tensing visibly at the direct question. "Just something I made up," he finally murmured, eyes still focused on the floor, the wall, anywhere but the teacher's face. Before Mr. Williams could respond, could process the implications of what he'd just heard, that this 12-year-old had been improvising music of that complexity, that emotional sophistication. Prince had slipped past him and into the hallway, footsteps barely audible as he navigated the institutional corridors with the practiced invisibility of the habitually overlooked. The bitter Minneapolis winter air hit him like a physical force as he exited the school building, pulling his inadequate jacket tighter around his narrow shoulders. The walk home would take 30 minutes in good weather. In this bone-chilling cold, closer to 40. But Prince didn't mind the solitude of these walks, the time between spaces that allowed his mind to continue the musical explorations his fingers had begun. In his head, songs continued to develop, arrangements evolved, instruments he had never even touched added their voices to compositions that existed, for now, solely in the landscape of his imagination. The outside world, with its complicated social hierarchies, its bewildering unwritten rules, its constant evaluations and judgments, fell away during these internal symphonies, replaced by a realm where he understood every nuance, controlled every variable, belonged completely. Home was a series of apartments in Minneapolis's north side, each one temporary, each one bearing the particular tension of spaces occupied by people whose relationships had grown as cold as the Minnesota winter. His parents had separated years earlier, the specific reasons unclear to their young son, but the emotional aftermath impossible to miss. Prince had first lived with his mother, then his father, then back with his mother, each transition bringing new schools, new neighbors, new landscapes of unfamiliarity to navigate with his limited social tools. Currently, he shared a small apartment with his father, John Nelson, a jazz pianist whose own musical dreams had largely given way to the practicalities of supporting himself and his son through shift work at a local factory. The apartment smelled perpetually of the cigarettes John chain-smoked and the simple meals he prepared with more efficiency than enthusiasm. What lacked in warmth or comfort, it made up for in one crucial element: a piano, battered and slightly out of tune, but functional. The instrument had followed them through multiple moves, John insisting on its transport, even when other possessions had to be left behind due to financial constraints. If this story moves you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more untold stories from music history. Moments when legendary careers hung in the balance, when small decisions changed the course of cultural history. These glimpses into the vulnerable beginnings of artistic icons remind us that even the most extraordinary journeys begin with simple, human moments of courage and transformation. As Prince entered the apartment, stamping snow from his worn sneakers, he found his father already seated at the piano, cigarette burning in an ashtray, perched precariously on its scratched surface, fingers moving through jazz chord progressions with the fluid grace that his son had inherited and amplified. John Nelson was a man of few words, his emotional expression channeled almost exclusively through his music, another trait his son had absorbed. Their communication occurred primarily through the language of melody and harmony, conversations conducted in notes rather than words. John nodded acknowledgement of his son's arrival without interrupting his playing, a gesture that contained neither warmth nor coldness, but simple recognition. Prince set his backpack down and moved to the kitchen area of the small apartment, automatically starting the process of preparing a simple meal from their limited supplies. This role reversal, child caring for parent in the practical matters of daily life, had become routine, accepted without discussion by both parties. As he worked, Prince listened to his father's playing, mentally cataloging the chord progressions, the rhythmic patterns, adding them to his ever-expanding internal library of musical elements. Despite the tensions in their relationship, despite the absences and disappointments that characterized John's parenting, Prince recognized and valued the musical legacy his father had provided. Not just the genetic components of talent and aptitude, but the immersion in jazz improvisation, the understanding of music as something fluid and alive rather than fixed and predetermined. After their silent dinner, after the minimal conversation about school and practical matters, Prince took his turn at the piano. John listened from his chair, cigarette smoke creating a hazy atmosphere in the small room, his expression unreadable. What thoughts passed through his mind as he witnessed his son's rapidly developing abilities remained unexpressed? Was there pride in seeing his own musical gifts magnified in his child? Jealousy at the raw talent that already, in some ways, surpassed his own? Concern about the practical challenges of pursuing a musical career, especially for a black kid from Minneapolis's economically disadvantaged North Side? Whatever complex emotions swirled beneath his stoic exterior, John Nelson offered neither effusive praise nor cutting criticism, just the silent attention of one musician observing another. "That middle section needs work," he said finally, the first direct comment on his son's playing he had offered in weeks. "You're rushing it." Prince nodded, immediately returning to the passage in question, adjusting the tempo with meticulous attention. This was their relationship: sparse verbal communication, minimal emotional expression, but a shared language of music that provided a bridge across the vast silences between them. In this space, Prince wasn't the awkward, almost painfully shy child that his teachers and classmates encountered. He was simply a musician, his value measured in notes rather than words, his worth determined by the sounds he could produce rather than the social connections he struggled to form. what no one in Prince's life fully recognized yet. Not his father with his own frustrated musical ambitions, not his teachers who saw glimpses of unusual talent amid the social awkwardness, not his peers who registered him primarily as the strange, quiet kid who never quite fit anywhere. Was that this apparent mismatch between his internal richness and his external presentation was creating the perfect incubator for something revolutionary. The very qualities that made his daily existence challenging, his hypersensitivity, his difficulty conforming to social expectations, his intense internal focus, were the same qualities that would eventually enable him to create music that defied categorization, that blended genres and influences with unprecedented fluidity, that expressed emotions and ideas most people kept carefully contained behind social masks. The following day at Bryant Junior High found Prince once again navigating the treacherous waters of adolescent social dynamics, with his characteristic strategy of minimizing his presence. He moved through crowded hallways with a kind of physical efficiency, taking up as little space as possible, avoiding eye contact, speaking only when directly addressed, and then in the barest whisper necessary to convey essential information. His academic performance was uneven, brilliant in subjects that engaged his interest, particularly music and visual arts, barely adequate in areas that failed to capture his intense but selective focus. Teachers generally found him a puzzle, clearly intelligent, but seemingly unwilling or unable to engage in the normal patterns of classroom participation. Classmates largely ignored him, his silence and social awkwardness rendering him nearly invisible in the hyperactive social ecosystem of junior high. The music room remained his sanctuary, the one place where the parameters for success aligned with his natural abilities rather than highlighting his deficiencies. Here, during lunch periods and after school, he continued his self-directed exploration of every instrument available. Piano primarily, but also drums, guitar, bass, anything he could access without having to request special permission, which would have required the verbal interaction he so assiduously avoided. Mr. Williams, recognizing something extraordinary in this unusual student, increasingly provided tacit support by forgetting to lock the music room during lunch, by allowing access to instruments that were technically reserved for senior band members, by creating space and opportunity without drawing attention that would have made Prince uncomfortable. It was during one of these solitary music room sessions that the first significant milestone in Prince's journey from painfully shy child to revolutionary artist occurred. A substitute teacher, unfamiliar with the unspoken arrangement that allowed Prince exclusive access to the music room during lunch, entered to find him playing a drum kit with surprising proficiency for someone with no formal training. "You're pretty good," the substitute said, genuinely impressed rather than merely offering adult encouragement to a child. "Do you take lessons?" Prince shook his head, eyes fixed on the drum heads rather than the teacher's face. Self-taught, he managed to whisper, the words barely audible over the heating system's mechanical hum. The substitute nodded, about to leave, when Prince did something unprecedented in his school experience. He initiated further conversation. "I play other instruments too," he said, his voice slightly stronger though still far from confident. "Piano, guitar, bass." The admission seemed to cost him considerable effort. As if revealing this aspect of himself created vulnerability he was unaccustomed to risking. "Show me," the substitute said, gesturing toward the upright piano in the corner. What followed was a 12-minute impromptu demonstration that left the adult witness in stunned silence. Prince moved from instrument to instrument, piano to guitar to bass, and back to drums, playing each not with the fumbling experimentation of a beginner, but with the assured competence of someone who had already internalized the fundamental language of music itself. More astonishing than the technical proficiency was the stylistic diversity. Elements of jazz from his father, soul and R&B from his mother's record collection, rock influences from radio, and the limited television he was allowed, all synthesized into something that wasn't yet fully formed but already contained the seeds of a revolutionary approach to genre. When he finally stopped, breathing slightly elevated from the physical exertion, but eyes alight with the particular energy that only emerged when he was fully immersed in music. The substitute teacher regarded him with an expression that combined shock, admiration, and a hint of something else. The slightly uncomfortable recognition that they were in the presence of something that didn't quite fit normal developmental patterns, that suggested not just talent, but a kind of prodigy that defied easy categorization. You know, the substitute said carefully, choosing words with deliberate precision. There's a music program at Central High School that accepts junior high students with exceptional abilities. You should have Mr. Williams help you apply. This casual suggestion, offered without full understanding of its potential impact, became the first domino in a series of events that would eventually transform the painfully shy Prince Rogers Nelson into Prince, the boundary-breaking icon whose musical innovations would reshape the landscape of popular music. The specialized music program at Central High School provided not just advanced instruction, but, more crucially, recognition and validation of his unusual gifts. For perhaps the first time, Prince found himself in an environment where his differences were seen as valuable rather than problematic, where his intense focus and perfectionism were assets rather than social liabilities. Most importantly, he encountered peers, other musically gifted students who shared his passion if not his particular genius, creating the first tentative connections that would eventually lead to band formations, collaborations, and his entry into Minneapolis's local music scene. By 15, this transformation was well underway. Though still socially reserved, Prince had begun to develop a secondary persona that emerged through musical performance, a confident, even flamboyant alternative self that could express the complexity and intensity that remained largely hidden in his day-to-day interactions. This emergent performance identity allowed him to channel his sensitivity, his difference, his outsider status into something powerful rather than painful. The very qualities that had made him an awkward misfit in the rigid social hierarchy of junior high became reimagined as artistic distinctiveness, as creative courage, as visionary perspective that allowed him to see beyond the boundaries that constrained more conventional talents. In the small but vibrant Minneapolis music scene of the mid-1970s, word began to spread about this unusual teenager who could play virtually any instrument with professional-level skill, who was writing songs that defied easy categorization, who seemed to absorb and transform musical influences with unprecedented originality. Local bands began to seek him out, first as a side musician, then increasingly as a feature performer. Though still painfully shy in social situations, Prince discovered that on stage, a transformation occurred. The anxiety and awkwardness fell away, replaced by an almost supernatural confidence, as if the music itself provided a protective shell within which his true self could finally emerge without fear or limitation. By 17, he had secured his first recording contract, a remarkable achievement for any musician, but particularly for a teenager from Minneapolis, a city then considered peripheral to the mainstream music industry centered in Los Angeles, New York, and Nashville. The contract offered creative control unusual for a debut artist, a testament both to Prince's precocious mastery and to his already well-established reputation for uncompromising artistic vision. The shy child who had once barely been able to speak above a whisper when addressed directly now insisted on playing all instruments on his recordings, on producing his own material, on maintaining artistic ownership in an industry known for exploiting young talent. This was not ego or arrogance, but a deep, almost desperate need to ensure that the pure expression of his musical vision wouldn't be diluted or compromised by outside influences. His first album, released when he was still 19, received moderate commercial success but significant critical attention, particularly for its technical accomplishment. The fact that this teenager had performed all vocal and instrumental parts himself, a level of musical versatility virtually unprecedented in popular music. But it was his second and third albums that began to reveal the truly revolutionary nature of his artistic vision. The fearless blending of funk, rock, R&B, jazz, and new wave, the explicit sexuality combined with spiritual yearning, the androgynous presentation that challenged conventional gender norms. The painfully shy, socially awkward child had begun his metamorphosis into Prince, capital letters fully earned, an icon whose influence would eventually extend far beyond music into fashion, film, and the very concept of artistic identity. What remained consistent throughout this transformation, from awkward child to revolutionary artist, was the intensity of focus, the perfectionism, the absolute commitment to artistic vision that had been present even in those early days at the battered piano in Bryant Junior High's music room. The shy boy who had once used music as escape from a world that seemed too loud, too demanding, too difficult to navigate had found a way to reshape that world according to his own vision, to create an artistic identity that contained and celebrated the very qualities that had once made him an outsider. The hypersensitivity that had once been a liability became the source of music that conveyed emotion with unprecedented intensity. The social awkwardness that had once isolated him became transformed into a mystique, an enigmatic quality that added to rather than detracted from his growing legend. If this video has touched you, if it has reminded you that our greatest strengths often emerge from our deepest vulnerabilities, please like and subscribe. Share it with someone who might find inspiration in this journey from painful shyness to revolutionary self-expression. And remember that behind every iconic performer, every seemingly supernatural talent, lies a human being who had to find their own path through the same fears, doubts, and limitations we all face. Someone who didn't eliminate their differences, but found a way to transform them into the very qualities that would eventually change music forever. Years later, long after Prince had become an international icon, Mr. Ronnie Williams, the music teacher who had provided those crucial early opportunities for a painfully shy child to explore his extraordinary gifts, attended a concert in Minneapolis. The artist on stage bore little obvious connection to the quiet boy who had once hidden behind the piano in his classroom. This was Prince in full regalia, commanding the stage with a confidence and charisma that seemed to have emerged from some alternate universe rather than the same body that had once seemed to physically shrink from direct attention. But when the performance reached a quiet moment, when Prince sat alone at a piano and began to play something hauntingly familiar, Mr. Williams felt a shock of recognition. The melody, now fully developed and incorporated into a commercially successful song, was unmistakably derived from the improvisation he had heard that winter afternoon in the Bryant Junior High music room, when a 12-year-old had lost track of time, lost in the world of his own creation. After the show, through connections maintained over the years, Mr. Williams was invited backstage. He entered the dressing room with some trepidation, uncertain what version of his former student he would encounter. The international superstar, the notorious musical perfectionist, the enigmatic figure who had become as famous for his reclusiveness as for his public performances. What he found, in a quiet moment between the performance and the inevitable industry obligations, was neither the painfully shy child nor the larger-than-life icon, but something that suggested the complex integration of both, a man who had found a way to channel his differences into art that had changed the landscape of popular music forever. Mr. Williams, Prince said, his speaking voice still soft but now containing a quiet confidence that had been absent in childhood. Thank you for not locking the music room that day. The simple acknowledgement contained multitudes, recognition of how small kindnesses can alter life trajectories, how crucial it is for unusual talents to find spaces where their differences become strengths rather than liabilities, how the journey from painful shyness to revolutionary self-expression requires not just extraordinary gifts, but the opportunity to develop them on one's own terms. In that moment of connection between teacher and former student, now equals in mutual respect, if not in fame or influence, the full arc of an extraordinary transformation became visible. From the child who couldn't raise his eyes when speaking to the man who had changed music forever, not by overcoming his differences, but by finding the courage to express them in their purest, most revolutionary form.